For those watching on YouTube, yes, that is an X-Wing behind me. No, the sequels are not good, but yes, that picture is very, very cool. So, Kalen DeBoer is proving people wrong at Alabama. Those two things didn't relate to one another. I just felt like mentioning both, and this is my show, so that's how we roll. Kalen DeBoer is off to a good start on the recruiting trail. If you look at the 2024 recruiting class, it ended up being all right. Now, of course, there were a couple of transfers out of it. Peyton Woodyard went to Oregon. Julian Sain went to Ohio State, but they brought in a bunch of transfers as well, and their win total is 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Oh, what do you know? Alabama is currently, I know there's a long way to go. Just save yourself the comment. They're third in the country in recruiting. Oh my gosh, I'm shocked. But Kalen DeBoer didn't recruit that well at Washington. He's not a big recruiter. I don't know if he can recruit down south. We haven't seen it yet. Well, we're kind of sort of starting to see it. They picked up a quarterback commit recently of, wait for it, the blue chip variety. They're currently ranked ahead of Georgia by a little bit. That may or may not last. But here's what you have to consider. Even if you think that 3 is as high as Alabama's recruiting ranking is going to get in the 2025 cycle, if it's currently a 3rd, what's the lowest you think it can get to? What is the absolute lowest that Alabama's recruiting class, 17 commits into their 2025 cycle, and certainly not done, what's the lowest they're going to drop to? This was the big question surrounding Kalen DeBoer. You cannot look at what he did at Washington or any of his other coaching stops as a head coach or an offensive coordinator, frankly, and say this guy does anything but win football games. When he first took the job at Alabama, I remember the title of my show, the first day. It was the first episode of Locked On College Football, in fact. And the title was Kalen DeBoer Can Win National Championships at Alabama. You know why? Because he can. Because he's that caliber of coach. And up at Washington, make no mistake about it, those rosters had been incredibly well recruited and grossly mismanaged before he got there. He introduced Michael Penix to the equation, and everybody else was mostly already on his team. And so that was, I think, a legitimate question. For those who'd say, oh, everybody was wrong to doubt Kalen DeBoer. It was completely ridiculous. They were just being haters and whatnot. No, I think it's a fair question to ask. There's a difference between asking a question, between questioning and doubting. It's a more efficient way of what I was going to say. Questioning is, I think this is possible. I'm just not 100% confident it's going to happen, so I need to wait and see. Doubting is, nah, this can't happen. No, he can't do this. No, he can't do that. Well, Kalen DeBoer is showing you right now, for anyone who questioned whether he can recruit, that he can. And yes, the transfer portal counts. He brought a bunch of guys with him from Washington. So why don't we even say, let's hold judgment again? Let's say we don't know what he can do in the transfer portal as the head coach at Alabama because he's not always going to have a previous team to just pull guys from. That's not how that's going to work. So, okay, I'll reserve judgment there. But of the two, which one do you think would be harder? Recruiting high school kids or recruiting transfer portal kids? I'm going to go with high school kids there on the whole. So the recruiting class is overall looking good, and I'd fully expect them to bring in a top 10 class. And by the way, those rosters that he had at Washington, they were full of good players. Jimmy Lake and Chris Peterson had put together several really, really good-looking recruiting classes. They were not top 5. They were not top 10 classes. They were good. Got a lot of good players, a lot of NFL players as a result who weren't all looking like they were going to be NFL players until Kalen DeBoer got there. And that's the other question that I have. Again, not a doubt with Alabama that I have. A question, maybe the biggest question I have about Alabama. What is Jalen Milroe's role in a Kalen DeBoer offense? Stylistically, these two guys are not the same. They're just not. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're different. Think about Lincoln Riley and Jim Harbaugh. Those are both great college football coaches. I will once again remind you that Lincoln Riley is not the village idiot, even though the perception of him is that he's terrible. He's so bad. No, he's not. I got several years of data to prove that he is not. Anyway, those two coaches, one of whom has a national championship, which took like 10 years, by the way, and one of whom does not, play football, or they want their teams to play football in a completely different fashion. Lincoln Riley wants to spread you out, run a lot of 11 or 10 personnel, and he wants to throw it around the field and have a complementary but successful running game. Jim Harbaugh wants to line up draft offensive linemen as weapons, as he said once he got to the Chargers and they took Joe Alt out of Notre Dame, probably the best offensive tackle in the draft. And he was asked at a presser, or he said at a presser, I'll probably face questions about weapons, but we view offensive linemen as weapons. You think Lincoln Riley views offensive linemen as weapons? I don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because he's been an incredibly successful college football coach. He's never had a losing season. He's never even had a 500 season. He is a very successful coach. Both have been really successful. They view football differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so stylistically, that's how I think of Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe. When you think of Jalen Milroe making plays last year, go watch last year's game against Michigan in the semifinal. Milroe, I thought, was mostly pretty good. He makes some ridiculous plays with his legs. When you think about Michael Penix the last couple of years and what he did in Kalen DeBoer's offense, do you think about what he did with his legs? No. Who was the quarterback that Kalen DeBoer had? This is a great trivia question that you can stump your friends with. Who was the quarterback, now a backup in the NFL, that Kalen DeBoer coached before Michael Penix at Washington? 3, 2, 1. Jake Haener is the name. Jake Haener's a baller, gamer, absolute dude. Glad to see he's carved out a backup role in the NFL. Guy was a baller at Fresno State. Where did his best plays come from? Oh, that's right, from the pocket. From the pocket. So I wonder what those styles look like. I think it's entirely possible you could have any one of three scenarios stylistically for Alabama's offense, and Nick Sheridan is their offensive coordinator. Number one, DeBoer adapts his system to Milroe's strength and plays through him, as the Alabama offense did last year. Once they figured out he was a starter, of course. Number two, there is a hybrid system in which you have more quarterback runs than DeBoer typically has in his offensive scheme, but you also have more pocket plays required of Jalen Milroe than he had a season ago, and he's not running as much. And number three, Kalen DeBoer thinks he can take Jalen Milroe, who's certainly a talented guy and has good arm talent and good athleticism to keep plays alive, and he hones him into the kind of quarterback he wants him to be, which is your legs are an asset to allow you to throw, not just an asset for you to run. And he adapts the game of Jalen Milroe into what his offense will look like. I think the most likely option is number two. But am I curious to see how that fits? Yeah, because they're different. It is not what DeBoer has had. And I think they're going to have the opportunity to succeed. He's got a good receiving core. You got Ryan Williams, the 5-star plus true freshman. You got Jeremy Bernard coming over from Washington as a transfer. Those are just two of the weapons they have. There are several others, but those guys on their own, I think, give you enough. So I'm more than a little fascinated to see how that all plays out. But right now, I think Kalen DeBoer is doing just fine, and we might be overthinking him, as I mentioned before. 10-2 in the playoff feels very likely. The win total is 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. If you feel differently, by all means, you may put your money where your words or mouth is, depending if you're talking or typing. Speaking of the playoffs, two, not one, but two teams that I consider a dark horse in that they're not at the top of your mind when you think college football playoff, but you have to consider them for different reasons.